We're Sean. Just talking about but out in the area. Not in your area.
Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for attending our meeting tonight. We will get started with a prayer by Commissioner Lewis and the pledge by Commissioner McLean. But just a reminder prior to that, please silence your devices for the meeting. Thank you.
Our eternal Father in heaven, we come before you this evening and give you thanks, Father, for the abundance of blessings that we enjoy. We're grateful for the community that we live in. We're grateful for the good neighbors and friends that surround us for us. We invite you to be in attendance at this meeting this night. Please bless us that we may reason well and that we may make correct decisions. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. The first two items on our agenda this evening are considered consent items. That means we can entertain a motion to approve both of the items in those consent items all together. The first item is the Planning Commission minutes from August 8th. And then the second item is a consideration of a request for a home occupation permit for the White House Pre-K to operate a school business at 457 South Doubleday Street in the R2 zone. First, I'll ask the commissioners if there are any of those two items that you'd like to pull for discussion. Anyone in the audience by the raise of hands that would like to pull any of those items for a specific discussion? Okay. Then we will entertain a motion.
Okay, I motion to approve the consent items.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. I like these consent items.
Real quick.
Yes.
As alternates, or which ones?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to see you guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both of you guys can be seated because there's four. So we'll officially seat Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Lake. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Okay, the third item on our agenda is a consideration of a revised preliminary plat, conditional use permit, and project plan application for a mixed-use development consisting of two commercial buildings with residential units above the commercial located at 826 South, 1600 West. And I'll turn the time over to Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. So this project is on a parcel that's just under 2 acres in size. It's zoned general commercial. In 2018, the Planning Commission reviewed a similar proposal for 2 mixed-use buildings. At that time, the Planning Commission continued the application with a request for changes and some additional information. And so the applicant has been working on those recommendations from the Planning Commission and is now back before this body for review and approval. The subject parcel here on the aerial is, like I said, 1.75 acres right at the entrance of Harvest Parkway. This is the Harvest Park Commercial to the north, Highway 89, the Abington to the east. This was the proposed plan that you reviewed in 2018. As you recall, similar concept, commercial with residential, but the buildings were flat roof design There were several concerns raised by members of the public as well as the commission regarding the design, and so that was one of the main things that was requested to be changed. So the proposal before you tonight is 2 mixed-use buildings. The north building is about 7,200 square feet of commercial with 8 condominiums above. The south building is 9,000 square feet with 10 condominium units above. The application requires conditional use permit approval for the mixed use, subdivision approval, and project plan approval. The Planning Commission is recommending body on these to the City Council, but these are administrative applications. And so what that means is with administrative applications, the city's discretion is really quite limited to whether or not the proposal complies with the adopted standards. The city can require conditions to mitigate reasonably anticipated detrimental impacts, but as far as the proposed uses, because those have already been identified as appropriate in the zoning code, we're not here to discuss whether or not mixed use is a good idea at this location. That decision's been made when the code was adopted. And so the commission is really just determining whether the proposal meets city standards. This is the proposed site plan. If you see, so they've got the 2 proposed buildings with the parking to the west side with the entrance off of Harvest Parkway. They are proposing, staff is recommending that we include a wall or a fence between the south and the west property line for the neighbors. Yes, with Barlow's and then the residential that's to the west. I did get a call from one of the residents that lives just kitty corner from this location, and he requested that the fence be extended for this section so that the residential structures that are on this side, when they're looking, they're not seeing the parking lot but has some landscaping in the fence there. I think as long as that's as far as it extends, I think that's a pretty reasonable request and would be a reasonable recommendation.
Would that inhibit their snow removal?
That was one of the places they showed pushing it, was to that.
It probably would if you put it right there. The fence could go out a little bit if that ultimately was the proposal from the commission. But yes, that's a good point. That would impact that. Okay, so these are the renderings of the proposed elevations, with the ground floor being commercial with residential above. They've gone away from the flat roof design as was previously proposed and tried to propose something more consistent with the existing Harvest Park buildings as well as the Abington, which is located across the street. These are the elevations. So during the previous review, the Planning Commission requested that they address some of the issues that were raised regarding whether or not the proposal was required to be part of the Harvest Park CCNRs and HOA, as well as obtaining access from the HOA to the property. The HOA owns a strip of land between the road and the street. So the applicants have been working with the Harvest Park HOA and have come to terms, and I forwarded you an approval letter from the HOA that we received earlier. As far as snow removal and construction traffic, they've included some information in the packet. The plan would be to push the snow to the landscape islands. And as far as construction traffic, at least to the extent possible before the buildings go vertical, the intent would be to come in off of 89 and then exit onto Harvest Parkway to minimize the construction traffic on Harvest Parkway, at least until the buildings are vertical, where you wouldn't be able to have that access. The Planning Commission requested some additional information from the traffic engineer. Additional traffic counts were taken and included in the study. As they've indicated, there's no significant traffic impacts that are anticipated from the proposal. The main condition, as I mentioned previously, was to eliminate the flat roof design, which the applicants have done. As far as the city's design standards, they require that buildings be close to the street with the parking behind. We encourage quality materials, pedestrian connections to the sidewalk, covered building entrances, variation in roof planes, and various other design standards. The application is consistent with the city's design standards. As far as parking goes, I think this really is the main topic for the Commission's focus tonight, is to ensure that the site is adequately parked. There's limited opportunities outside of the site for parking, and so we want to make sure that the site does have adequate space to handle the parking. The commercial tenants at this point are still unknown, or at least have not been finalized. The applicant can speak more to that when they speak to the commission. The city's commercial parking standards vary based on use. And so since we don't know what the users are, the city's assuming the more restrictive requirement of 1 space per 200 square feet of floor area. So with that as the standard, the total required spaces would be 117, and the applicant's proposing 104. If the applicant proposed just professional offices or a requirement or uses that would require less than 1 per 200, they're actually providing more parking than would be required. The code does allow for the Planning Commission to allow for some shared parking, up to 25%, for uses that don't share a peak time. So the idea is that the residential uses the peak times in the evenings and early mornings, whereas the commercial is during the day, so that at night when the residential is at the peak, there are more open spaces, and vice versa during the day for the commercial. So some options to consider would be to, one, allow for the shared parking as proposed, but limit the commercial uses to spaces that would not require more than the 81 total spaces. The second option would be to deny the request for shared parking and only allow commercial uses that would generate a need for 68 spaces or more. That would essentially allow for what they're proposing, and they would exceed the minimum parking standards. A third option would be to look at reduction in the residential units. So those are some potential ways you could think about addressing the parking standards or the parking issues if you believe there are some. With that concludes staff's proposal. The applicant is available to respond to questions and comments as well.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So just like Sean mentioned, and this came before us about 18 months ago, and there was quite a bit of discussion. And at the time, even though it's not a public hearing item, we did open it for public hearing then. We heard a lot of concerns. We proposed that it go back to the applicant and they work out a deal and some negotiations with the HOA, which they did. And now we're back to the item this evening. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and allow the applicant to come up and present, and then if we have any, as a commission, have any questions for the applicant. And then we'll open it up to the commission for a discussion and then a motion. Then this application will then be reviewed by the city council at an upcoming meeting. And so we'll go from there.
Hi, my name is Susan Palmer, and I am the project manager of this development. We have worked hard to try to get these buildings so that they meet the requirements for the Harvest Park area, so they're more compatible. As Sean has said, we have been working on this for the last year, trying to get everything taken care of. We feel like the parking, the use of the buildings, to bring you up to date, just when I came in, Keith Johnston, the owner of the buildings, called me and said that they do have one of the buildings sold probably, and it will be a dental office. The dental will take possession of the whole building and the residence club. So just to let you know that that's kind of what one of the buildings will be so far. Other than that, we feel like Sean has presented to you our project, and we hope that we'll be able to move forward with it now. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Just to clarify, so the dental office will occupy the whole first floor of one whole building?
That's what he just told me on the phone.
That's the only LOI you've got so far?
Mm-hmm.
Sean, could these have a future use of a restaurant?
Again, it's based on the parking standards, but yes, the commercial zone allows for a restaurant. That is a possibility.
So if it was a restaurant, they would have to comply with the parking standards based on their square footage.
Correct.
Which is hard to do for a restaurant.
Yeah, it just depends on what mixes you would propose between the two buildings of whether they could accommodate.
Okay. Susan, are you planning on doing both buildings at once, or are you doing a phased approach?
think we're doing both buildings at once.
I like the building materials, they look a lot better this time,
Yeah.
and I like the pitched roof,
Thank you.
so thanks for doing that.
You're welcome.
Just a quick question about that dentist office that's expressing interest. Is that the north building or the south building?
I don't know.
Not
He just
sure.
barely called me, so I don't know. I didn't have time to discuss
Yeah,
that.
no
So Sean, is a dentist considered professional use of the building, but we looked at the parking?
So the dental office actually requires more parking than the 200. I think it's 1 per 150, so they would have to work out what the other commercial uses could be to fall under that 81 total if you allowed for the sharing.
Will the dental office purchase the building outright and own it
Yes.
forever?
I don't know if we don't ever,
No.
But your intent is to sell the buildings, not to own them and lease them, right?
but that's right.
Any other
Justin is
questions?
our realtor. He may have other information for you that he could give to you as far as who we're looking at for tenants, because we're not thinking that it will be a restaurant in any way.
You know, you say like the sell portion of it would feel like the, I'm Justin Johnson.
Oh, thank you.
Been in the apartment project before you guys hit the floor, but we just think it makes sense. The interest that we've had is that people, the business owner would own the building, would owner user, and because of the delays that we've had on it, we really have not marketed it. Kind of held off doing that until we knew what we had, we could offer out there. And so hopefully this is the first step. This is something that we're, we think it makes the most sense to maximize the parking and use of the space there.
I think that Sean asked if we would be willing to limit the parking to two cars per resident and make that part of our CCNRs, and we would be willing to do that.
What would that do to our numbers if you limited the cars to 2 per resident?
The numbers wouldn't change. That's the minimum requirement by the code, but what would help address is having people move in that would have more than that would exacerbate any potential parking problems. So it just helps ensure that the parking would be sufficient.
Any other questions?
I don't have any questions for the applicant.
Okay, we might have you come back up if we have more questions, but we'll turn the time over to the commission to discuss.
Given the transient nature of the business, and even if the dental office comes in and purchases the whole first floor, that doesn't mean that the dental office will be there in perpetuity. And so then I would say that we should require the required parking because we don't know what's coming. And you know, you go downtown Provo, you see big fights over parking. And we're going to create that in this meeting if we don't stick to it.
Because the alternative is, you've got people illegally parking on Harvest Park Drive or where that road is, and that's totally county roads.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be better to have it in case you need it, rather than need it and not have it.
So there is another option, that is to require the design to reduce the number of condos, which would reduce the number of apartment stalls required. I think being that it's kind of up to us as the commission to determine whether this is a commercial building with residential, or if it's a residential building with commercial.
You're talking 13 spaces.
13
so
stalls.
Divided by 2, you're asking them to take off 7 units. There's 8 per building, right?
Well, there's
10.
10, so 18. So it's a big chunk to reduce the parking that way, but
part of the conditional use though, Sean, is we could require it to only remain the professional office for the life of the conditional use.
Right, so the options you have is you could require that no more than 68 spaces be for commercial, if you kept the residential consistent or where it is now. And that means they would be required 101 total parking spaces, and they have 104. So if they decided that they wanted to do, if you wanted to allow them to have some flexibility to whether it, it'd be uses that may require a little bit more, you could authorize the shared up to 25%. So as they're proposing it right now, the total required if you were using it for the most intense uses would be approximately 117 by our code, and they're providing 104. So if you think it's reasonable that the commercial spaces will be utilized during the day and the residential during the evening, and that they've provided sufficient to ensure that there's not going to be spillover, then you could take that approach too. The safest from just the parking standpoint would be to just tell them you've got 68 total parking spaces for commercial and 36 for your residential, and you got to fall within that. But that doesn't give them, if you want the option for them to have something other than just professional office or one of the uses that require fewer parking, then you could allow the sharing.
Professional office would eliminate the dental office, right? They couldn't fall under that classification.
Yeah, I wouldn't specify a specific use per se. I would just say that commercial parking is capped at 68 spaces, which is what they're essentially providing.
What, even for restaurant real then?
Right, so if you have 68 total spaces, we have an application comes in for the dental, it takes up 35 of those spaces. The other businesses or the other use could only be occupied by uses that would take up the balance of those spaces. So it could be a mix. You could have a retail space come in that requires one space per 250, and a dentist that's one per 150, and it balances out and works. But
how many total proposed businesses can go in the two units, the two buildings?
you could have those could be, you could do TIs and have additional businesses come up in there. Yeah, that's a possibility. But what we would have to look at from staff's perspective is each time a business license came in, it would determine how much parking you've got and deduct that from the total provided and determine whether that use could be allowed or not.
So that would be managed as each business comes in, or works with you? Because then, let's say somebody comes in and they have 5, and then they leave and another tenant comes in, then at that point it's based on what's left, right? It's
Right,
not
exactly.
based on what they had.
Yeah.
Okay.
They might end up with space.
Yeah.
And no parking.
Right.
Yeah, it's not, that's essentially what's happening in the north side of Harvest Park. They had a certain amount of parking spaces that was approved.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been handled.
Sean, what's the current setup? Because this mixed-use type of building exists just right across the street, doesn't it?
Right.
What's similar size, similar parking? Is there any takeaways from that?
Yeah, when I went back and looked at the total parking provided on the north side compared to the south side, if we used one space for 200 square feet for commercial and 2 for the residential, this space will have more parking than the north side per capita. So
What's the use right now in that north side?
there's a dental office, there's a construction office, there's a pharmacy, there's several other small businesses, there's an insurance, and there's I think 4 or 6 currently and 4 more just about completed.
There's 8 currently.
8 total.
Yeah.
8 condos?
8 right now, 4 more under construction.
And then I think the building on the corner that's not yet built had some residential above, didn't they? I'd have to go back and look at
The one that
hasn't been
the one that has
built.
the foundation has residential. The one out on the corner by Highway 89 does not have residential.
Wasn't
Yeah,
proposed.
I don't think it should have
So
So similar, but they're not exact.
in the pharmacy building, there's a doctor's office above. Is that, and then when they, I understand they're vacating is that only commercial above on that second level? Or is that, could that be potentially
They'd have to
residential?
come back if it wasn't originally approved as residential.
So right now, it's just approved as commercial. Okay, that's just for my curiosity. Any other concerns? What do you guys think? Should we tackle the parking first and then move on to any other concerns?
I think the proposed changes is a reasonable solution.
68
This seems to be a requirement.
And then capitalize that so that they're limited to what businesses can come in.
Can you go to the next slide so I can see, yeah, that one? So we're talking about the 60 is getting a professional office.
There's other things, there's other uses that could fall into that.
Right.
There's some retail uses, but
But just,
anything
if we
that's,
cap it at 68,
yeah, it's,
then
We don't have to cap it as professional, it could just be
we
associated.
can just cap it at
commercial.
68 to give them leeway as to what, okay.
yeah, I think all you would do is deny the request for shared parking. So they're proposing 104 total spaces between the residential and commercial. That's their limit.
So it'd be 68 commercial, and then the remaining balance would be available for residential. And there's 18 units?
36 more.
Is that number indicated on this site plan?
The 104?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, because that looks like you're at max capacity right there, based on the site plan. Okay. Barlow's requested a wall, what you said?
No, staff's proposing to include the separation.
Is there any issue with ingress, egress, 2 points of access, or any of that?
No, it's been reviewed by fire.
Okay.
One thing I would note, mentioning the fire department hasn't reviewed this concept plan of the building layout, and there is I've noticed a landing on the roof, and just in generally talking to the fire chief earlier today, he did say that he would have to look into seeing whether that would meet our fire code as far as accessibility and living quarters based on the capacity of the fire department.
Yeah, you're talking about the buildings?
The
Yeah,
buildings
because
itself.
there hasn't been a formal proposal for
Right.
the building.
So there would have to be that stipulation that if we ultimately decided to allow this design to go forward, they would still have to meet the code requirements and the fire chief's inspections. Which it's a little, to me, it's a little questionable just because it's so high.
What is the height?
It's 45 feet, which is the max.
There's rooftop seating, right?
That window, that little tiny window up in the eaves, is that just a decorative window? Do you know?
It's
just
open.
there,
Well, there's no occupied space on the other
There,
side.
so the roof
That's the
area is
rooftop,
not
it's on the
occupied
area.
space. It's not
So that goes,
living
okay, I see.
space. More of a garden space or just a,
Yeah, these won't have, I don't think they'll have glass in them, I'm assuming that's just an open breezeway.
I know the one thing that we had concern with on the building on the north end of this was that they wanted a decorative window, but that poses a risk for the firemen who might think that there might be somebody in that room, and if it exceeds the height of the capacity of the fire truck, then firefighters might risk their lives trying to get in there for no reason at all. So we made them on that north building get rid of that decorative window just to
Which
get rid
one?
of that. The one north of the pharmacy, or just directly west of the pharmacy.
Across the street.
They
Oh, so
have-
we're talking about the building north of this,
Yeah,
okay.
north of this. So I'm not sure, that might have to, as far as the
just
design
leave it
goes.
open, like,
Yeah.
parking was the only question I had. Everything else is pretty straightforward.
So this is just a question. At what point would they consider doing the right at the intersection? One of my concerns is, as a citizen, is I'm looking at the traffic coming in only one way, and then they're not just coming in, but they're coming in and turning left, which is not always possible because of traffic coming the opposite direction.
Right.
So, I mean, there's not a lot of room right there when you turn into there, so you get help. I'm just wondering, it's got to be at least on the agenda at some point.
Yeah, so the city has an access management agreement and a lighting spacing agreement with UDOT, but UDOT will, because UDOT decides it and it's based off the traffic count. So they'll analyze it. When it's ready, when it meets their standards, they'll
No, Mapleton's a two stoplight town, or cabinet.
Yeah, we snuck one in.
Looks like we gotta move.
Right on the corner of town.
Yeah. So yes, there will be a spot.
Do they take into consideration the estimates? I mean, like, I'm not-
They would, yeah.
I mean, they consider that.
That's kind of what pushed it over the hill on that north, on the 1600 north highway. Like, there was several accidents a few months
That's
before.
what this is just really concerning us. Students coming in and having to take a left.
Yeah, when you think of, Powers Park, that's close to 500 homes, right?
I know.
So that issue exists, whether this project is or not. We certainly can reach out to you again. We
I'm sure.
have conversations with them
I'm
frequently.
sure you
And there's enough going on in the area that, yeah, they may be closer to work.
because it's a school and other things.
And there's several developments going around to increase them.
So because of that traffic from the school as well.
Right.
I know I've heard from several citizens about just the feel of the buildings, not kind of fitting in with the rest of Harvest Park. I know that was a big concern of ours last year when this came before. Any thoughts on that? I know it was briefly mentioned, but as far as the design of the buildings themselves, matching those around, any concerns with anybody?
I think from the commercial design standards that Mapleton's adopted, this meets every single one of those.
Right.
We're not using stuff that looks like a lot of hardy and rock and brick.
I thought that was reasonable.
I think the change that they've made from the old look to this look is definitely.
Yeah.
Nothing else? Okay, we'll entertain a motion then.
I will motion to approve current proposal with the following condition that we deny the request for shared parking. We cap the commercial parking to 68. And everything else is presently constituted.
With this existing conditions, no other new conditions. Okay.
With these,
With the only condition of denying the request for shared parking.
And there's some pretty special conditions in it.
Yeah, there are listed conditions.
So one would be replaced by your motion to deny, and then just keep to it.
And then also include, as a presently written, solid fencing should be installed on the west and south property lines, and then a separate sign application should be submitted for all signage proposals.
I second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that is our last item for the evening. Thank you all for attending, and we'll be adjourned to the next meeting, which is September 12th.
Thank you. Thank you.